welcome to our second hour of our program. On the line with us is our buddy Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based out of Kiev, Ukraine these years. You can find his video blog over on YouTube. Just plug in his name, Philip Ittner, Philip-Ittner. Ittner Philip, the reverse of that is his Twitter handle. And Phil, I understand that a Russian missile almost took out the president Zelensky and the president of, was it Macedonia or Greece or?
No, Greece. Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister, thank you.
Indeed. And they were down in Odessa, which frankly shocks me a little bit, Tom, because Odessa has been a magnet, has been a focus of Russia's missile and drone attacks. So for the Greek Prime Minister and President Zelensky to go down there jointly was a risky thing to do. And apparently, yes, there was an impact. Something came in, hit relatively close to the motorcade. The Greek Prime Minister saying that the alarm came so suddenly that they weren't actually able to get to a secure location, whether or not that was because they were in a spot where there just wasn't a bunker nearby, or whether or not there was miscommunication between the various security protocols. We don't know, but it did come close. Now, there's been discussion of would that have initiated Article 5?
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, it's a civilian leader. There is a debate there. And, some people are saying no, because it's civilian leadership. It's not a military target. Other people saying it doesn't really matter, right, because NATO would have to invoke Article 5. They would have to meet, discuss it. And if they so deemed it to be an attack on an alliance member state by killing a prime minister, then yes, Article 5 could be initiated, but it's uncharted territory.
Yeah, the question in my mind is whether the NATO treaty includes the word territory, a strike on another state's territory. If it does, then this would not qualify. If it's more vague, then maybe, right?
Yeah, exactly. And there's also this talk of maybe it's still very rough talk and kind of amorphous, but that French troops could be sent here. Macron saying possibly sending French troops here. And people have already noted that if French troops were on Ukrainian soil, if a French soldier were to die at the hands of a Russian soldier because of this territorial issue, because you're on Ukrainian soil. Again, with Article 5, we are in uncharted territory. I mean, I don't know. And I think Brussels, there would have to be a meeting at the NATO headquarters in Brussels, including obviously the Canadians and the American presence there. And they'd have to decide whether or not to invoke Article 5.
Well, there have already been several Americans who have died in Ukraine at the hands of the Russians. They were not official U.S. soldiers. They were people who just went over and volunteered. But interesting.
It does make a difference. It does make a difference, obviously, if you're in uniform and deployed by your sovereign state.
Makes sense.
So
for people listening who don't know where Odessa is or what its significance is, you want to just fill us in real briefly on that?
Odessa is one of the most important cities in Ukraine. It was built by Catherine the Great, and Russia has a very serious desire to reclaim it. I have been to Odessa several times since the full-scale invasion and war began, and I can say it is a fortress city. It is adamantly anti-Russian, and it was on the line because there was a lot of Russian speakers down there. It is historically a city that the Russian Empire and then subsequently the Soviet Union used as one of their major warm water ports. So Moscow would like to reclaim it, but they keep attacking it, and they blew up a church, an old 18th century church, which was infuriated Odessites about a year and a half ago. They took out a major hotel along the Corniche, and then just within the last week or two, they hit an apartment building, which has really struck the Ukrainian people, not just Odessites, but all of the Ukrainian people, because it killed so many children. There were 7 children killed in a building, and the imagery is devastating. Little children killed in their beds, and Odessa will never succumb to Russian dominance again. The hatred down there for the Russians is palpable. So it's an important city. It's a target for the Russians. It's something the Russians want to reacquire. But having been there, it would be a very difficult thing for them to achieve, the Russians.
If there is a hell, there's a special place in it reserved
Oh,
for
yeah.
Vladimir Putin. Sweden has become a NATO member. Talk to us about
Indeed.
how this
Indeed.
happened and what it means.
Well, it means that the Baltic Sea it will soon be when Finland is finally adopted, and they are going through the process as well. That the Baltic Sea will become a NATO pond, is what it's being referred to, and it will blockade in Russia's fleets. They will not be able to move should a hot war ignite between NATO and Russia. So this is a very much not. It is a containment of a potential threat, a potential hot war with Russia. Sweden has got a long history of animosity with Russia. St. Petersburg was taken by Peter the Great. It used to be Swedish territory, so there's long-standing history of that. But they had no intention of joining NATO until Putin decided to invade Ukraine. And so, this argument that that people in Moscow put forward that they are against NATO expansion, and that is why they were worried about Ukraine, and that is why the excuse they give for invading. Well, I find that questionable, seeing as now we're seeing more NATO states, and you don't see Moscow crying bloody murder about Sweden or Finland joining. No, Ukraine is a special case. It's not about NATO. It's about colonization. This is an imperial war. Ukraine has a special place in Russia's sense of self as empire. They're not upset about NATO expansion. Otherwise, they would be jumping up and down about Sweden and then subsequently Finland. It's Ukraine, because Ukraine is the cornerstone of their empire. It is their first and most important colony. That's why they're fighting here.
Yeah, I totally get it. Your thoughts on Mr. Medvedev rolling out this new map 2 or 3 days ago that shows that there's now the Greater Russia now includes all of Ukraine, and that it includes enough of Poland that Kaliningrad is now reunited with continental Russia. This is I saw this as essentially a declaration of war against NATO. I was astonished that it got no coverage in the American press at all that I can see.
Well, sadly, Tom, I'm afraid we here in Ukraine are kind of getting used to a lack of media coverage. The next shiny object has come along and we have been forgotten. But you're absolutely right. This was so diluted. This is the concept that what Medvedev is putting forward is this expansionist Russia, a rebuilding of the Soviet Union, of the Russian Empire. But like so many in kind of the, I think, kind of myopic view of the Muscovites, is they really can't get it through their head that this place, Ukraine, will never bend the knee to them again. They don't have the capacity to take a city. We were talking just now about Odessa, but there are other cities, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, all of these cities with a population larger than, say 1 million or 700,000. If Russian troops try and take and hold any of the major cities in Ukraine, they will look at an insurgency and guerrilla warfare that will shock the world. I mean, I was in Iraq, and that insurgency was significant, and I don't want to diminish what that was, but the Ukrainians are ready to really resist with everything they have, because it's an existential threat. So, they are gaining ground, the Russians, because we aren't giving them the weapons that they need. The ammunition is so depleted. Right. But it has to be admitted that Russia is making advances. But if they try and take a city, like Medvedev was showing this map where they had taken over all the major cities of Ukraine, and we even hear Vladimir Putin now saying that ultimately it's inevitable that the spiritual and national relationship between Ukraine and Russia will be restored. They're living in a fantasy world. They do not understand the opponent they face, that there is a country here with a separate identity from Russia, and it's gone forever. They crossed the Rubicon when they started killing men, women, and children in their beds, when they started attacking the civilian infrastructure of this country, when they started saying that Ukraine doesn't have the right to exist. We're past a certain point of no return. Ukraine will never be Russian again, and they have to get that in Moscow, and it doesn't seem that they do.
Yeah. And finally, we're talking with Phil Ittner, the veteran war correspondent based out of Kiev, Ukraine. His video blog is Phil Ittner over on YouTube. You mentioned Zaporizhia, the nuclear power plant. The last I heard, which was 2 or 3 days ago, there was a report of the Financial Times that the last trained Ukrainian nuclear engineers at that plant are gone. It's entirely being staffed by Russians, and most of them have no training in nuclear power. They don't really know what they're doing. What kind of danger does this represent to Ukraine and the rest of Southern Europe?
Well, I mean, it's obviously something that we have to keep a very close eye on. You're right. The Ukrainian operators have vacated or been pushed out, and now it's Russian.
And this is the largest plant in Europe, by the way.
This is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. It is obviously something that the world is very concerned about. We have, the inspection, the UN inspection teams that do go in there periodically. Nobody is running around with their hair on fire quite yet. But this is obviously cause for concern because, if God forbid, another nuclear disaster happens on Ukrainian soil. We saw what happened with Chernobyl, and the legacy of that is very much still alive here in Ukraine. But a meltdown or some sort of catastrophe at the Zaporizhia plant would be, several grades larger and more damaging than that. So we have to be concerned, but let's not panic quite yet. Right. We'll have to see how, what the UN inspectors say as they continue to go in there.
There you go. Phil Ittner. Check out his video blog over on YouTube at Philip Ittner. Phil, thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Always great talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 18 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dan Rather has some thoughts. And hey, are Republicans helping Mexicans smuggle fentanyl into the United States? I'll tell you about that right after the break.